Wyoming Territory, Christmas Eve, 1889. The snow fell heavy and steady, swirling like ash in the dark. Wind lashed through the narrow alleys behind the town's inn, sharp enough to slice skin and unrelenting. It was the kind of winter cold that punished the unprepared, and out here, Leanne was painfully unprepared. She sat near the fire pit, its embers long since faded into a bed of dull red. Her back pressed against the icy timber wall of the inn, legs tucked to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. A tattered red cheongsam, the silk thin and foreign against the brutal Wyoming elements, clung to her shivering frame. It was a dress meant for a wedding, for celebration, not for freezing to death in an alleyway. Her boots were damp, and her fingers shook uncontrollably. Her stomach cramped from hunger, she had not eaten since the morning before last. Her small cloth bag lay beside her, the embroidery frayed, her grip on it as tight as her jaw. The purse she had carried, containing what little money she had brought from across the ocean, was gone, stolen on the platform at the train station in a jostle of elbows and shouted directions. Still, she would not beg. She would not knock on the door of the inn again. Not after the woman inside had turned her away with a glare at her foreign features and the sound of a locking bolt. She had been promised a husband, a home. Instead, she sat behind a building on Christmas Eve, discarded like refuse. Footsteps approached, wet, heavy boots trudging through the snow. Leanne looked up. A man reeking of whiskey stumbled into the alley. He paused when he saw the flash of red silk against the white snow. "Well, now," he slurred, grinning through yellowed teeth. "Aren't you a vivid little thing?" She stiffened. He took a step closer. "What's a girl like you doing out here alone?" She said nothing. Her heart pounded, and her fingers gripped the handle of her bag. Another shadow joined his. Leanne recognized the second man instantly, Mr. Finch, the broker from the train station. The one who had organized her placement. "Look at that," Finch sneered. "Knew she'd end up here. Guess your future husband didn't want a Chinese bride after all, did he?" Said he ordered a wife, not a curiosity. They spoke around her like she was a package gone undelivered, something broken. The drunk chuckled. Figure someone ought to get use out of her. Leanne stood too fast. The alley spun, but she caught herself against the wall. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling but sharp. The drunk stepped forward. "Don't make a fuss, sweetheart. Cold night, good company. We can all stay warm." Her back hit the wall. There was no more room to retreat. She kept her bag between them like a shield. She was trembling, not just from fear, but from weakness, hunger, and the bone-deep cold. "You do not get to fall," she told herself. "Not tonight." That was when she heard it. The distinctive click of a hammer being pulled back on a revolver. The sound cut through the wind like a whip crack. The two men froze as hoofbeats approached. A figure appeared at the end of the alley, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a duster coat heavy with snow and a low-slung gun belt. He said nothing as he walked forward, but his presence shifted the air. He stopped just behind the drunk and the broker. "You have somewhere else to be," the stranger said, his voice low and calm, with the gravelly edge of a man who didn't waste words. The drunk glanced back, trying to sneer, but faltered when he saw the tied-down holster on the man's thigh. This was a gunslinger, not a town sentiment. "We were just going," the drunk stammered. The men hesitated, then, grumbling, they slunk away down the alley, not daring to look back. Silence returned. Leanne stood there, still pressed to the wall, barely breathing. The man turned to her now. His gaze moved over her quickly, her shaking hands, the tattered red silk, the bruised pride, and the way she refused to cower despite it all. His voice was quiet but clear. "Is there anyone waiting for you?" She blinked. No one had asked her that. Not since the train. Not since the man who promised marriage took one look at her face and vanished. She shook her head just once. The man took off his heavy duster coat and stepped forward. He placed it around her shoulders, slow and certain. Then he looked her in the eyes. "Get up," he said. "You're coming home." Leanne's lips parted. She almost asked what he meant, but he was already turning. A wagon stood parked beyond the alley. Inside, bundled in thick quilts, 4 children watched quietly from beneath the canvas. Leanne looked down at the coat around her, heavy, warm, smelling of tobacco and pine. She took one breath. Then she followed. Jericho's ranch was a long ride from town. The wagon creaked along the snow-packed trail, wheels crunching softly beneath the weight. Leanne sat quietly beside Jericho, wrapped in his coat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She was afraid that looking around might break the spell and send her back into the cold. The children were nestled under thick quilts behind them, quiet and watchful. She had not asked where they were going. She did not want to know, terrified that if she asked, he might change his mind. Jericho drove in silence. After a long stretch of quiet, Leanne finally spoke. "He said I would not do," she murmured. "The man who ordered me. He said he did not know I was Chinese. He wanted a sturdy woman to work the fields, not." This she gestured to her silk dress, giving a soft laugh, bitter and small. "Then he sent me away. On Christmas Eve." Behind them, one of the boys stirred. Sam, the oldest, spoke with a voice direct and unflinching. "Do you have someone to protect you?" Leanne turned to look back. The boy's face was pale and solemn, his gaze far older than it should have been. Her throat closed. She blinked fast, fighting the hot tears. "No," she whispered. "I do not." Neither Jericho nor the children said anything for a moment. Then, quietly, Jericho said, "Around here, children are not chosen. They are kept." No one spoke again for the rest of the ride. The ranch house came into view through the snow, small, sturdy, tucked beneath a low ridge with smoke curling from its chimney. The wagon pulled to a stop, and Jericho climbed down, lifting Toby, still half asleep, into his arms before helping Leanne off the bench. Warmth hit her the moment they stepped inside. The fire in the hearth crackled steadily. The air smelled of wood smoke and something savory. The children followed in one by one as Leanne moved slowly toward the fire. The 4 of them turned to look at her all at once. Sam stood closest, watching Jericho first, then turning to Leanne with calm, unreadable eyes. Ben hovered near the door, eyes flicking toward it as though afraid it might shut again and leave him out. Lily peeked from behind a wooden chair, small fingers gripping the edge. Toby whimpered softly in Jericho's arms, burying his face into the man's coat. Leanne stood, unsure where to step. She had never seen children so still. Without a word, Jericho guided her gently toward the hearth. He pointed toward the wooden bench closest to the flames. She sat slowly, her fingers still trembling. Jericho ladled soup from a pot over the fire and handed her the first bowl. Steam rose in gentle curls, and her hand shook more from gratitude than cold as she accepted it. He looked toward Sam and gave the boy a nod. No words passed between them, but Sam understood. He moved over and made space beside the fire for the others. The children settled in one by one. Leanne took a sip of the soup. It was thin, mostly broth, but warm and real. She glanced up. The children ate without talking, each glancing at her from time to time. No one asked why she was there. No one asked her to leave. And in that silence, something inside her softened. A gunslinger with 4 children. She looked at Jericho, who sat with Toby still in his arms, calm as the firelight flickered across his rugged features. None of them are pushed aside, she thought. Not even the smallest one. The soup was gone too fast. She held the empty bowl in her lap and stared at it, blinking back tears. She had eaten. She was warm. And for the first time in days, Leanne felt safe. The wind howled through the gaps in the wooden walls again, a long, low whistle. But Leanne had barely moved. She sat quietly, watching the children. Ben flinched each time the wind changed pitch, his shoulders rising with every gust. When the soup had been served, he had waited until Jericho took his seat before eating. Lily had taken one look at her bowl and gently pushed it toward Toby. The toddler had already been nodding off, but Lily only picked up her own spoon after checking that his bowl was full. Sam never spoke unless spoken to. He moved with quiet purpose, collecting the firewood and stacking it neatly without being asked. Leanne noticed a pair of worn boots drying near the stove, smaller than Jericho's but older than the rest of the children's things. She had seen Sam put them on earlier. They were scuffed at the toes, well used. They had belonged to him for years, from before. The others wore clothes patched and mended, clearly Jericho's doing. But Sam's coat, though repaired, had history. Leanne did not want to ask, but quietly, almost to herself, she said, "The oldest. He is your real son, isn't he?" Jericho did not answer right away. He looked toward the hearth where Toby was now fully asleep against his chest. Then he said in a voice so low it almost blended with the crackle of the flames, "He is the only one who never had to ask if I was coming back." Leanne looked down at her cup. There was nothing else to say. Leanne woke to the faint scent of cornmeal and wood smoke. The room was still dim, touched only by the glow of a low fire. She stepped out of the room to find Jericho already up, crouching near the stove. "Morning," he said without turning. Leanne murmured a soft reply. Across the room, the children played in quiet clusters. There was a strange kind of calm to them, like they knew someone in the house needed quiet to mend. Sam stacked small wooden blocks. Lily sat curled with a doll made of cloth. Ben was sketching on the frosted window. Leanne moved toward the stove, reaching out to lift a pot, desperate to be useful. But Sam was already there. "I got it," he said simply, shifting the pot toward the warmer edge. She took a step back. She grabbed a broom, but Ben was already sweeping. She glanced at the table. Lily had already arranged the spoons. Leanne stood still. No one had asked her to do anything, but there was nothing left to do. She had never felt more unneeded. She walked back toward the door, heart tight. Jericho looked up from the skillet. He saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she held herself too straight. Without a word, he wiped his hands and followed her to the porch. The cold met them fast. Jericho picked up a pair of thick gloves and held them out. "Applewood makes the best fire for cornbread," he said casually. "Nobody has ever roasted corn over it quite like you, I'm guessing." She blinked at him. It was not a command, nor a suggestion. It was an invitation. Her hands shook as she reached for the gloves. They walked in silence to the edge of the barn where the woodpile sat. Jericho handed her a small axe. "I am not very good at this," she murmured. Jericho shrugged. "Neither was I," and then he left her there. The glove scratched her wrists. The wind tugged at her coat. She split one log, then another. Her hands were clumsy, but her back stayed straight. She lasted 10 minutes before the tears came. She leaned against the wall of the barn, breath shaky. The tears were silent but hard, coming from years of being a weight, a burden, a thing to be traded. Behind her, the door creaked. Lily patted up with a slice of cornbread on a tin plate. "I saved you the corner piece," the girl said. Leanne knelt and took it with both hands. "Thank you," she whispered. She bit into it. She did not need to be perfect. She just needed to stay. The sky had turned a dull pewter grey, and the snow had started falling again when Leanne heard the hooves. 2 men on horseback approached the ranch. Her breath caught. It was the man who had rejected her, accompanied by Mr. Finch, the broker. The rejected suitor dismounted first. "Leanne," he said, voice low. "I came to bring you back. I should not have turned you away. I've had time to think. You deserve better than being stranded out here." Finch dismounted, brushing snow off his sleeves. "You signed a contract," he added sharply. "You were promised, and now you're in breach." From the barn, the door creaked. Jericho stepped into view. He did not hurry. He simply walked forward and stopped beside Leanne. He wore no expression but calm. The wind lifted his coat, revealing the iron on his hip. Jericho did not look at Leanne. His eyes remained on the men. "What does she owe you?" he asked. His tone was not a challenge, it was a finality. The suitor opened his mouth, then closed it. Leanne spoke before they could. "I used to believe I had no other choice," she said quietly. "That being cast aside was the end of the road. But I do not believe that anymore." Finch scoffed. "She is spoken for. We have paperwork." Jericho turned his head slowly. "She walked through snow on Christmas Eve," he said. "With no coat, no food, no place to go. She does not owe you anything." The broker started to say something, but the look Jericho gave him, dark and dangerous, was enough. Inside the cabin, four small faces peered through the glass. The men saw it too. The evidence not just of Leanne's place, but of Jericho's quiet authority. Neither man spoke again. They mounted and rode off, swallowed by the falling snow. Leanne stood still, heart pounding. Jericho looked at her, his gaze steady. The past had come to reclaim her and left empty-handed. The days passed, quiet and unannounced. In the small ranch house, Leanne was no longer a guest. She mended a torn hem on Lily's dress using scraps of red silk from her own ruined cheongsam. The stitches were uneven, but Lily grinned. With Toby, it was simpler. He had begun reaching for her without thinking, tiny hands grasping at her skirt. And with Sam, it was slower. He helped her carry firewood and watched her, measuring who she was by what she stayed for. One evening, Sam sat on the floor while Leanne gently brushed his hair. He did not squirm. Then, without turning, he asked, "Are you going to stay forever?" Leanne's hand stopped. She looked toward Jericho, who was whittling by the fire. "I would like to," she said quietly. "If you all would let me." Sam nodded once. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded square of fabric. It was an old handkerchief. "My ma gave me this when I was little," he said. "She said to keep it when I missed her. I think maybe you should have it now." Leanne took it with trembling fingers. She pressed it to her lips, then looked up at him. Not a boy asking for a mother, a boy telling her she had become one. The wind was shifting when they finished loading the wagon for a supply run. Leanne stood beside Jericho, arms red from the cold. "You sure the horses can pull this much?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. They climbed into the wagon together. The snow came sooner than expected, thick, heavy flakes that clogged wheels. The wagon lurched and stopped. "Too deep," Jericho muttered. They led the horses to a small cave half hidden under a ridge. Inside, the cold was still sharp. Jericho built a small fire. Leanne sat with her back to the stone wall, shivering. Jericho shrugged off his coat and draped it around her again. "You do not have to," she said. "I do not leave people cold in the snow," he replied. He looked at her, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. "I still do not know if I can be a mother," she said, staring at the flames. Jericho was quiet for a long time. Then he said, voice low, almost unsure, "I do not know how to ask a woman to marry me. I have no ring, and no pretty words. I have a house full of children and a past full of violence." The wind howled outside. "But if you are still sitting here come morning," he said, "then the house is yours, too." Leanne stared at him. There were no promises, just the smoke between them and the warmth of his coat. She smiled, shifted a little closer to the fire, and did not move all night. 1 year later, the ranch breathed warmth. Leanne sat by the hearth, knitting a red scarf. Sam moved carefully around the dining table, arranging plates. He was taller now, surer of himself. Lily and Ben giggled from the corner where they hung pine cones on a crooked fir tree. Toby sat in the middle of the rug, holding a toy horse. "Mama," he called out clearly. "Yes, darling, I am here," Leanne said, ruffling his hair. The door creaked open, and Jericho stepped inside, coat dusted white. He shook off the chill and looked across the room. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to her. "It is not much," he said. Leanne untied the string. Inside was a folded piece of thick paper. Birth certificate. Mother, Leanne Blackwood. Children, Sam, Ben, Lily, Toby. She looked up, breath caught. "I cannot give you much, Leanne," Jericho said steadily. "No gold, no name in town that matters. But if I can write your name into the lives of these children, if I can make it real for them and for you, then I reckon this Christmas will feel whole." Leanne's hand covered her mouth. Her eyes burned. Behind them, the soup began to boil over. Sam rushed to tend it. Lily shouted that the tree was tilting. Toby squealed with laughter. It was a day that had once meant empty pockets and colder nights, now filled with the fullness of sound and hands to hold. Leanne leaned her head against Jericho's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying get up, you're coming home that night," and this time, she knew she had. The story of Leanne and Jericho teaches us that family is not defined by blood, but by the will to stay when the winter is at its harshest. It reminds us that true strength is not found in the hardness of a gunslinger's past, but in the tenderness required to heal a broken home. Leanne's journey proves that even when the world leaves us freezing and forgotten, there is always hope for a new beginning if we are brave enough to accept it. Forgiveness plays a vital role here, not necessarily of those who hurt us, but allowing ourselves to forgive our own perceived inadequacies. By choosing to nurture the children and trust a stranger, Leanne transformed a shelter into a sanctuary. Ultimately, love is the act of saying you belong and meaning it, every single day. What did you think of Leanne's choice to stay and build a life with Jericho? If this story warmed your heart, please leave a comment with your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of resilience and love, and thank you for watching.